week's episode. Today we are talking about Do I Make Myself Clear by Harold Evans. First impressions?
Questions?
First impressions.
Oh, first impressions?
Mm-hmm.
Well, before we get to that, if you can't write,
Mm-hmm.
you can't think logically, and therefore you can't talk.
My English teacher used to say that if you can't write, you can't think, and if you can't think, you can't write. And I don't know if the inverse is true, but certainly if you can't think, you can't write.
Well, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this is the way I learned English.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from the ground up. The time I was in high school, we were downgraded on the improper placement of words, verbs, adverbs, adjectives,
Mm-hmm.
and because we were supposed to be able to diagram sentences and get all that stuff together straight. And the good side is that if you did all that, then you did make yourself clear.
Yeah, exactly. The first thing that came to mind for me is this guy is a Brit. He's a freaking British knight, right? So who the hell is this guy to be lecturing us on how to use English? He's not even from here.
Well, at least he didn't try to mix up the British version.
No, actually, he is an American citizen. He's been here for 23 years, and he's edited British newspapers and English newspapers, and American newspapers. So he is fully versed in American English. And he actually works for Reuters, which is, kind of the compendium of American English. Them and AP, they actually wrote the book on English for journalists in America. So that's pretty cool. But anyway, I mean, I just thought it was hysterical that, the guy is a British knight. And, and he's got a really good sense of humor. So that helps a whole heck of a lot with the book, as opposed to your standard grammar textbook, which would be absolutely no fun to read whatsoever.
Yeah, well, I didn't get it just in school. My mom
Mm-hmm.
harped on English.
And it shows,
Does?
Yeah, I mean, you're a fantastic editor, and, every writer needs an editor. And that is kind of the main point of the book. If you were to boil it down to one thing, it's just nobody writes that well.
All the time.
Great, huh?
All the time.
Right. All great writers have a great editor. And, he gives a really good example. FDR, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, he wrote the A Day That Will Live in Infamy speech. And he dictated it first. So, I mean, he wrote the first draft. He dictated it to his secretary, and she typed it up and gave it to him. And then he took a pencil, and this is in the National Archives. You can see what the speech was to start with, which was nothing much. I mean, it was a grilled cheese sandwich as far as speeches go. And he turned it into a filet mignon, by scribbling all over it and tightening it up. And he got rid of probably a third of the speech, made it a whole lot shorter. And, A Day That Will Live in Infamy, that was an edit. That was not in the original speech they wrote. So, I mean, all of that really kind of goes to show you that it's worth the time, even if you only have 15 minutes before going on the radio, after learning of Pearl Harbor, you've got time to edit, and you better take that time because it really makes a difference as to how you're understood and how people react and whether or not you can get people to agree with you or understand you. And that was a really good example. And I love the fact that he teaches by stories, which is so much more interesting than saying, if you don't edit, then nobody will believe you, But that's a fantastic example. Another really good example that he gives is the Social Security regulations. And this one is actually causing people to lose money. Bad writing causing people to lose money. You've got bad policy. The Social Security Act of May 2016. He says it's like Kafka waking up in the bleak house. So basically there are 9,000 different claiming options, and the administration is prohibited by law from giving case by case personal advice. So there are 2,728 rules governing Social Security, and the program operations manual is thicker than the Bible. And because of that, there are millions of people, possibly, like nobody knows how many, vast numbers of Americans who are not receiving the benefits that they should be because they don't understand it. And the people that they're talking to, the people that are advising them, don't understand it. And, so bad writing is a horrible thing, and not only does it cause people to not respond to your ad, which is what we're concerned about, but it causes people to lose money. It causes people to lose wars. It causes people to, have all kinds of problems that they wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, negotiators are those that are very good with the language.
Yeah, exactly. The spoken language and I don't know if anybody negotiates in writing. I guess they do. I mean, a sales process is a negotiation in writing nowadays with
Well, any
different.
of the political negotiations are all done on paper before they actually
Mhm.
start speaking.
Right, right. That's true. And that's another thing, is that speaking is different than writing. And I actually did some research, before we got on this call. In 2018 and 2019, we wrote articles for our blog. In 2020, we did almost always. Later 2019 and most of 2020, we did mostly transcripts, because I found this fabulous place that would do fairly cheap transcripts. And I thought, okay, cool. I don't have to do the writing anymore. We'll just do the videos, and then we'll have transcripts, and we'll publish the transcripts, and they'll have all of the keywords and everything. And I don't need to do any actual writing. So that's going to save me so much time. It's going to be so great, right?
Not.
And and then in 2021, we went back to doing summaries and then having transcripts. So I actually wrote a summary, and then we had the transcript. And all of our articles from late 2019 and 2020 are not our best performers. None of them, not one of them that is just a transcript, is in our top 100 from our website. And I think it's because there's a difference between speaking and writing. When we're speaking, we don't edit. When we are writing, we do. And even if it's just writing even if we're just editing between our head and our fingers, we're editing when we are writing, and we're not editing when we're speaking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think if people edited some of the crap they put out on the internet these days, rather than put it out there, then they say, oh crap. But by the time they say, oh crap, I should have done this or that, everybody else responded to it, and they've got a war going on.
Yeah, exactly.
And they can't back out then and say, oh, I didn't mean that. I meant.
Mm-hmm. Right. But, if you follow anybody around with a microphone, they're going to sound like an idiot most of the time. Just because, people don't polish their thoughts or speak carefully. They don't organize their thoughts into three main points and a conclusion. There are a few people that can do that. There's actually a few people that we work with that can do that. Dave Santo is one at Aerostar. He is probably one of the best speakers I know, and he can actually compose while he's speaking. You ask him a question, he takes a breath, and in that space, you can see the composition take place. But not everybody can do that, and that's an interesting scenario. Doug Goldstrom's another. Actually, he does really, really well. You ask him to describe this fuel farm, and he has this really nice, organized, detailed presentation that just comes out of his head. It's really, really good. But most of us don't do that most of the time. We just say what's in our minds, kind of flow of consciousness, and it's not as polished, not as perfect, not as powerful, really, as people who can compose before they speak. Couple of things that I really liked that he talks about are zombies and flesh eaters.
Yeah.
The zombies is a noun that devoured a verb. So document becomes documentation. Verb becomes a noun, right? And participate becomes participation. Uh, English is just kind of, especially American English, he says, is kind of lousy with those kinds of things. And then the other one is flesh eaters, like uh, propositional parasites. Named becomes a man or woman by the name of, or stay becomes continue to remain. And legal language, I guess, is pretty bad with this, but a lot of people, especially when they're writing business style, or they feel like they're writing in a professional style, they add a lot of that garbage into their writing, even though they don't speak that way. So they actually write worse than they speak, unless they edit.
Well, and he made a point in government, I suspect. Well, I'm going to make a hasty generalization.
That's a logical fallacy. You know this.
The majority of our government people don't know how to write and therefore think logically. And then few of them do any editing other than what I call governmentese. Mm-hmm. And therefore, what they write makes it almost impossible to connect the dots.
Right.
And when you're talking about that, I mean, there's been a review of all the stuff prior to 9/11, and had people been able to logically think and make the connection of the dots, we possibly could have prevented that.
Really?
With what we knew.
Wow.
Yep.
I think a lot of people, even when they edit, they're not really reading. They're just correcting the mechanical stuff, but they don't really understand what they're editing, and say, you could communicate this better if you started from this point instead of that point. Or you need to reorganize this whole thing because of you're burying the lead, and you do that for me, which is the reason that some of our writing is actually pretty decent, because you actually do read the whole thing through before you start getting out the red pen and correcting all the grammar. But that's what editing is really all about, besides the making it clear what the words say, making it clear what the idea is behind the words is another deeper level of editing that most people don't do or don't have somebody to do.
No, it's I try to do that, but sometimes it's so disjointed.
We have to have a conversation. See, in the old school, newspaper editors used to do that. They would call the reporter in and say,
"What are you trying to say?"
Dude, where are you going with this? I didn't get it, and if the editor doesn't get it, then the reader's not going to get it. So, being willing and able to have that conversation without anybody getting defensive and weird about it, they're really doing you a favor. And we do that with our clients sometimes, when they will give us something and say, we need to clean this up. It's like, you know what, dude, this needs more than a cleanup. We need to express this idea better from the beginning, and here's a better way to express this idea, maybe in a video or maybe in a story or some other way, because this piece of writing is not getting the idea across.
Yeah. Now there's lots of interest. I mean, given you were raised like I was, mm-hmm. I mean, English, I got so tired of doing English, but evidently it's paid off.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of had the opposite experience in school. We did a lot of reading and a lot of writing in elementary school, and I never got into the mechanics until high school. And by that time, I knew what sounded right and what didn't sound right, and I could not necessarily tell you why, but I can tell you a correctly diagrammed sentence or a correctly structured sentence from an incorrectly structured sentence. And I don't necessarily know all the rules and all of the whys and wherefores of it. but I can tell you, this is right and this is wrong. And, it makes a huge, huge, huge difference in how well people communicate. And there's so much bad writing now on the internet and with people's posts and with people's LinkedIn posts and with people's fan fiction and everything else. There's anybody can write anything and has the ability to publish, and they don't necessarily get an editor, and it shows, right?
Oh yeah. And then he talks about the half-life of new words.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're talking about internet slang,
Mm-hmm.
The actual number of people who use that is probably less than 1 million.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to get it into the English language, and it's just, the English language is supposedly living and so forth, but some of these new words, he says, only have a half-life.
Right?
For days.
Yeah, and then nobody will ever hear about it again because it has to do with a metaphor that, was in popular culture or whatever, that kind of fades out of memory. It had its 15 minutes and move on to the next thing. And
Yep.
yeah, so I think, there is always a good argument for, well, that and the fact that a lot of us are now selling to international audiences. And not everybody is going to get a Kardashian reference, and not everybody is going to get a popular music reference. So there is a huge argument for writing in classic, polished, standard American English, right?
And
Especially if you're writing for an international argument or audience.
He quoted Orwell. This is a good quote.
Okay.
Emptying words of meaning is an essential step on the road to autocratic rule.
Yeah. There was a book we read a couple of years ago by Frank Luntz about, and I don't remember the name of it. It was Words That Work or Words with Power or something like that. And they were talking about how he actually coined the term pro-life. Before that, it was a different term. And, it made it so loaded with meaning and everything that, before that it was something different and it wasn't nearly as powerful. And, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're against the death penalty or that you're against this or against that, but, that's what it implies. And it has taken on a completely different meaning now. But yeah, I mean, politicians are really into coining phrases and making sure that they use the best possible word to make their idea sound as palatable as possible to their constituents. And in some cases, it's downright dishonest, and in some cases, it's just smart thinking. So it's hard to tell where you draw the line on that. I guess it depends on whether you agree with them or not.
One would hope that the people that do political lying, as in The Art of Political Lying by Jonathan Swift, what he talks about would hopefully have thought things through. They would do their own editing before they just speak up.
So Jonathan Swift wrote about
The Art of Political Lying. So anyway.
It's nothing new. Okay. Well, any famous last words on this?
Famous lost words? No, I don't think so.
Last words, worst words, best words, anything else? Importance of words.
It's a good book, and maybe for those that English driven through them like I did, it's you can glance through it and yeah, I get that, and get some good stuff out of it. He reviews some things that I was taught years ago, and it's refreshing.
It is. I think it's hard to sell a book on writing. It's hard to sell people on the time. This is worth your time, because everybody thinks that they can write. But if you think about how much more effective you could be and what changes that would make to your company if you could communicate 30% more effectively.
I mean, anybody can string words together on a text processor.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not writing.
Right. And nowadays they've got things like the copysmith and the AI writers and things like that, But even if you're using those, you need to know if it's giving you something that's good, bad, or indifferent, because sometimes it doesn't know. It could be technically perfect and structurally sound and everything else, but it doesn't get the idea across.
Doesn't say anything.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, absolutely. I think this is probably even more, because if you're using one of those copysmith or something like that, and you don't know how to write or don't know how to express an idea, you can do a whole lot more damage in a whole lot less time.
Yep.
And write a whole lot of really, really terribly inefficient ads and waste a whole lot of time and money if you don't know how to write. But if you do know how to write, and then using these tools, you can really rock the world. So I think it's definitely worth the time to read it. It's a little bit daunting. It's a little bit thick. For something that talks about brevity, he's sometimes not as brief as he could be, but a lot of that is, it's full of examples of terrible writing, which are actually pretty entertaining. So cool. Well, thank you for joining us, and have a great week.
Stay safe and healthy. Talk to you later.